The silence in the obsidian throne room was a physical presence, a heavy mantle that settled upon the shoulders of the man who occupied its central seat. King Damon of the Nightfall Kingdom was a ruler carved from power and frost, his visage a study in regal severity. From the high arched windows, the pale light of a dying moon cast long, skeletal shadows across the floor, failing to touch the chill in his ice-blue eyes. Around him, the grandeur of his castle felt less like a home and more like a beautifully crafted prison. The echoes of his solitary footsteps were the only music in the vast hall, a constant reminder of the emptiness that persisted despite his absolute authority. His council, a chorus of murmuring old wolves, had just departed, their latest entreaty hanging in the air like wood smoke. The need for a queen, a Luna to solidify his reign and secure his lineage, was a drumbeat growing ever more persistent. He had dismissed them with a wave of a hand, but their words lingered. He had spent a lifetime believing in the old ways, in the sacred bond of destined mates, but years of solitude had stretched that faith thin. The weight of his crown felt less like a symbol of power and more like an anchor tethering him to a lonely fate. Many miles to the east, where the air smelled of damp earth and pine, a different kind of silence existed within the territory of the Silverveil pack. Here, the silence was not empty but watchful, protective. In a sun-dappled clearing, Elara stood with her face turned to the sky, the forest canopy a tapestry of green and gold above her. She was the hidden heart of this pack, the only daughter of Alpha Corbin, and she moved with a grace that belied the strength coiled within her. Her spirit was as untamed as the land she loved, yet she lived within boundaries meticulously drawn by a father's fear. The loss of his mate during Elara's birth had forged his love into a shield, a gilded cage that both cherished and confined her. She understood his fear, but her own heart yearned for something beyond the familiar borders of Silverveil. She dreamed not of a political alliance or a title, but of a connection that was earned, a love that would see her not as a prize to be won or a treasure to be guarded, but as an equal. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying stories of a world she ached to know. A messenger arrived at the Alpha's lodge, his presence slicing through the pastoral peace. The scroll he carried was sealed with the unmistakable crest of the Nightfall Kingdom. Alpha Corbin read the missive, his broad shoulders tensing, his features hardening into a mask of grim foreboding. King Damon was coming. The king's progress through his territories was a thinly veiled search for a queen, and the thought of his daughter being paraded before that powerful, arrogant man filled Corbin with a primal dread. He found Elara by the riverbank and delivered his command, his voice leaving no room for argument. During the king's visit, she would not be presented as his daughter. She would be concealed, her luminous presence hidden among the household staff. He believed a king's gaze would never deign to fall upon a simple servant. Elara, feeling the familiar walls of her world close and tighter, acquiesced. She saw it as a game, a way to avoid the distasteful spectacle of being inspected like livestock, little comprehending the profound storm that was gathering on the horizon. The day of the king's arrival dawned crisp and clear, the air in the Silverveil Great Hall thick with anticipation and anxiety. When King Damon entered, the space seemed to shrink around his formidable presence. He was every inch the sovereign, his gaze a cold, assessing blade that swept over the assembled pack members. The eligible she-wolves of high rank were presented to him, one by one, each a vision of calculated beauty and political potential. He observed them with a detached politeness that was more insulting than disdain. To him, they were polished stones, identical in their ambition, utterly devoid of the vital spark he had spent a lifetime waiting to feel. A profound and weary disappointment settled in his soul. The ancient tales were wrong. The fated bond was a myth told to children. He was on the verge of issuing a curt dismissal, of condemning himself to a future of barren duty, when the main doors opened once more. A palpable tension gripped the Silverveil Great Hall, a living thing that coiled around the assembled pack members and the visiting royal entourage alike. King Damon stood near the great stone fireplace, a goblet of untouched wine in his hand. His imposing figure was a study in detached authority, his ice-blue eyes conducting a slow, dismissive inventory of the room. The initial presentations had concluded. The daughters of his betas and gammas, each adorned in their finest silks and wearing expressions of hopeful anxiety, had been paraded before him like rare blossoms offered for a monarch's approval. He had acknowledged each with a curt, regal nod, a gesture that conveyed neither interest nor rejection, only a profound and weary impatience. To the pack, he was a figure of legend, a king whose name was whispered with a mixture of awe and fear. His power was a tangible force that seemed to chill the very air around him. To Damon, this entire ritual was a hollow pantomime. Each smile was to practiced, each curtsy to perfect. He felt nothing, no primal pull, no resonant hum in his blood, no sudden quieting of the restless wolf that paced within him. The hope he had clung to, that fragile belief in a destined connection written in the stars by the moon goddess herself, began to fracture completely. It was a childish fantasy, one a king could ill afford. The weight of his duty, a cold and solitary burden, settled upon him with finality. He would leave this rustic pack no closer to finding a queen, and the prospect of a future chosen from political necessity rather than fated love stretched before him, bleak and interminable. Unseen in the periphery of this grand spectacle, Elara moved with a quiet efficiency she had perfected. Dressed in a simple, rough-spun woolen dress, her honey gold hair tied back in a practical braid, she was effectively invisible. She wove through the crowd, replenishing trays of food and drink, her gaze carefully averted from the king's imposing presence. A faint, ironic smile touched her lips. Her father's plan was working flawlessly. The great King Damon, in all his splendor, did not so much as glance in her direction. She was just another servant, a ghost in her own home. Yet, instead of relief, a strange pang of something akin to disappointment pricked at her. This was the mighty king whose arrival had sent her entire pack into a flurry. He seemed so remote, so encased in his own icy grandeur, utterly disconnected from the vibrant, living world around him. She found herself studying him not with fear, but with a curious critical eye, noting the stern set of his jaw, the loneliness that seemed to linger in the shadows behind his eyes, a loneliness that echoed her own. The festivities continued, the air growing thick with the scent of roasted meat, spiced wine, and the subtle undercurrent of unmet expectations. Damon's patience, never a plentiful resource, was nearing its end. He set his goblet down on a stone ledge with a definitive click, the sound cutting through the murmur of conversation. He would make his excuses to the Alpha and depart. This had been a fruitless endeavor. As he turned to seek out Corbin, a draft from the main entrance stirred the air. And in that moment, everything changed. It was a scent. It cut through the cloying aromas of the hall like a lightning strike cleaves the sky. Wild lavender, fresh, rain on sun-warmed earth, and something else, something utterly and uniquely her. The effect on him was instantaneous and cataclysmic. His wolf, the beast he held under such rigid control, surged to the surface with a deafening internal roar of recognition and possession. Every sense sharpened to a painful intensity. The world narrowed, the crowd blurring into insignificance. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat answering a call he had waited a lifetime to hear. His gaze, sharp and predatory now, locked onto the source. There, half concealed by a great stone pillar, was the servant girl. But she was no longer a servant. She was the axis upon which his world now turned. He watched as she looked up, sensing the shift in his attention, her storm-gray eyes widening not just with alarm, but with a startling defiance. Without a single word, King Damon moved. The sea of people parted instinctively before him, driven by the raw, commanding energy that radiated from him. He saw her take a slight step back, a fleeting gesture of retreat that only fueled his advance. The search was over, the myth was real, and she was standing right there. Time did not slow so much as it fractured. The clamor of the great hall, the murmur of voices, the crackle of the hearth, all of it dissolved into a distant, meaningless hum. For King Damon, the world had receded, leaving only the woman before him and the thunderous truth echoing in his soul. The pull was in physical force, a taut cord drawing him inexorably forward. His every instinct, honed over years of rule and battle, narrowed to a single, primal objective: claim her. He was aware of the gasps that rippled through the crowd as he strode past them, his focus absolute. He saw the confusion on the faces of his own guards, the shock on the faces of the Silverveil pack. These were trivialities, inconsequential details at the edges of his perception. His entire being was fixated on the woman who had frozen beside the stone pillar, her spine straight, her chin lifted in a gesture that was neither submission nor welcome, but a challenge. The simple wool of her dress, the practical braid in her hair, these were irrelevant. He saw only the fierce intelligence in her storm-colored eyes, the delicate strength of her wrist, the captivating scent of her that promised a home he had never known. He did not ask. He did not request. He simply reached out, his movements deliberate and sure. His fingers, which had wielded a sword and sealed the fate of kingdoms, closed around her wrist with an astonishing gentleness. Yet the contact was electric. A jolt of pure energy, white-hot and undeniable, arced through him, sealing the truth of the bond. It was a completeness so profound it stole his breath. His wolf, always a restless and dominant presence within him, settled into a deep, possessive purr of contentment. Mine. Her pulse hammered against his thumb, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of his making. He could feel the fine tremors that ran through her arm. Her eyes were wide, her lips parted in stunned disbelief. He knew his actions were a scandal. He knew he was breaking every protocol, every expectation. In this moment, he was not a king adhering to diplomacy. He was a man who had found his reason for breathing, and the trappings of royalty were meaningless compared to that fundamental truth. "Look at me," he commanded, his voice a low rumble meant for her alone, though the entire hall had fallen into a deathly silence to hear it. She obeyed, and in the depths of her gaze, he saw not just fear, but a blazing, unyielding spirit. It captivated him utterly. This was no meek servant. This was a queen in hiding. He turned, still holding her wrist, and addressed the stunned assembly. His voice, when it came, was not the cold, dismissive tone of earlier. It was vibrant, resonant with a power that was both royal and profoundly personal, ringing with a certainty that brooked no argument. "Let it be known," he declared, his ice-blue eyes sweeping the room before returning to her face. "The search is over. This woman is my destined mate. She is chosen by the moon goddess herself. She will be my Luna, your queen." He expected immediate acceptance of this divine decree. Instead, the silence that followed was heavier, more dangerous than before. It was the silence before a storm. It was broken by the sound of a chair scraping violently against the stone floor. Alpha Corbin rose to his full, imposing height. The air in the hall shifted, growing thick with the unleashed aura of a protective alpha. His face, usually a mask of composed authority, was contorted with a fury so potent it was a palpable heat. "Your Majesty." Corbin's voice was a low, gravelly growl that vibrated through the stillness. It was a tone no one used with the king. It was a warning. "You are mistaken. This is not a matter for a royal decree." Damon's brow furrowed, his triumph momentarily checked by the alpha's blatant defiance. He tightened his grip on the woman's wrist, a reflexive, possessive gesture. "There is no mistake, Alpha. The bond is undeniable. The goddess does not. You speak of bonds and goddesses," Corbin snarled, taking a step forward, his gaze locked on the king's hand encircling his daughter's arm. "But you act on impulse, seeing only what you wish to see. You speak of claiming your queen without knowing the first thing about the woman you are dragging into your world." It was then that the woman herself found her voice. She did not pull away from Damon's grasp. Instead, she turned her stormy eyes upon him, and the defiance he had glimpsed now shone forth, clear and sharp. "King Damon," she said, and her voice, though quiet, did not tremble. It cut through the tension with the precision of a blade. "You claim your mate, but you do so without knowing who I am." A flicker of irritation, the last vestige of his royal arrogance, crossed Damon's features. "It does not matter. You are mine. That is all that matters." A roar, barely human, erupted from Alpha Corbin. "It matters." The words were a thunderclap. He took another step, placing himself squarely between the king and the young woman, his body a shield. "You storm into my hall. You lay your hands on her without her consent, without my blessing, and you have the arrogance to believe it does not matter." His chest heaved with rage. "You claim your mate without knowing her lineage. You dishonor my house and my pack. The woman you are so certain is yours is my daughter." The word landed between them with the weight of a mountain. "Daughter." Damon's certainty faltered. His gaze flickered from the alpha's enraged, protective face to the womonsto Elara's proud and defiant one. The pieces snapped together with devastating clarity. The defiance that was not a servant's impertinence but an alpha's birthright. The way the pack had watched her, not with disregard, but with a hidden reverence. She had not been serving. She had been hiding. He had not found a servant. He had found a princess disguised in plain sight. He looked at Elara, truly seeing her for the first time, and a slow, dawning realization replaced his triumph. He had not just claimed his mate, he had ignited a war. The air in Alpha Corbin's private study was thick enough to choke on. It was a room of wood and leather, of maps and trophies, a space that spoke of a leader's practical strength, not a king's opulent power. The three figures within it now formed a tense triangle of conflicting energies. King Damon stood near the cold hearth, his arms crossed over his chest, every line of his body radiating an impatient, possessory certainty. Elara sat in a high-backed chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, a silent observer whose future was the subject of the brewing storm. And Alpha Corbin paced before his heavy oak desk, a caged predator, the low growl in his chest a constant underscore to the conversation. "You speak of the moon goddess's will," Corbin said, his voice a controlled rasp of fury. "You use fate as a bludgeon to excuse your actions in my hall. You saw something you desired and you took it, without a thought for her standing, her wishes, or the consequences. That is not destiny. That is the impulse of a spoiled monarch used to getting what he wants." Damon's jaw tightened. He was unaccustomed to being spoken to in such a manner, and every instinct demanded he put this alpha in his place. But the truth of the bond was a fire in his veins, a truth so absolute it overrode his pride. "You think this is about want?" Damon's voice was dangerously quiet. "This is about need. It is a fundamental truth of our existence. I did not choose her. The cosmos did. This is not a political alliance to be negotiated. It is a divine union that will make our pact stronger than any treaty ever could." Stronger? Corbin whirled to face him, his eyes blazing. "You humiliated her. You treated my daughter, my only child, like a common servant you found pleasing. You announced her as your queen to a hall full of people who know her as their alpha's heir. You have made her the subject of gossip and pity. You have not honored her. You have claimed her like a territory on a map." Elara watched them, the two most powerful men she knew, arguing over her as if she were a contested borderland. A slow heat began to build within her, melting the ice of her initial shock. She was not a prize to be won. She was not a problem to be solved. She was a woman with a voice, and they were both too busy posturing to hear it. Damon took a step forward, his gaze locking with Corbin's. "I felt the bond. The moment I touched her, it was sealed. There is no undoing it. Would you have me deny? The goddess herself? Would you have your daughter live a half-life, forever severed from her other half, because of your pride? My pride?" Corbin's laugh was harsh and bitter. "This is about her safety, her happiness. You know nothing of her, what she loves, what she fears, what she dreams of. You felt a spark and you would drag her into your world of courtly intrigue and cold stone castles based on that alone. That is not love. That is obsession." The word hung in the air between them. Damon flinched, a barely perceptible twitch that only Elara seemed to catch. He looked at her then, truly looked at her, seeing not just the destined mate but the woman, proud, frightened, and utterly silent in the face of her fate. He saw the truth in Corbin's words. He had been so consumed by the rightness of the bond that he had given no thought to the woman within it. He had not courted her. He had not won her. He had declared her. A profound shift occurred within him. The king receded, and the man emerged, humbled by the complexity before him. "You are right," Damon said, the words foreign on his tongue. Both Corbin and Elara stared at him in shock. "I acted as a king claiming his right, not as a man worthy of his mate." He turned his full attention to Elara, his ice-blue eyes holding hers. "I have spent a lifetime waiting for you. I will not lose you because of my own arrogance." He then addressed Corbin. His tone changed. It was no longer a demand, but a proposition. "You accuse me of not knowing her. Grant me the chance to learn. I will not command her. I will not take her from this pack against her will." Corbin's eyes narrowed. "What are you saying?" "I am saying I will stay," Damon stated, his voice firm. "I will remain in Silverveil for 1 month. I will court your daughter with the respect she deserves. I will prove that my intentions are not merely of possession, but of genuine regard. And at the end of that time, the choice will be hers. If she refuses me, I will leave, and the bond be damned. I will bear the emptiness alone." The silence that followed was absolute. It was an unheard of concession. A king bowing to the will of an alpha and his daughter. A man risking his very soul on the chance to be chosen. Corbin was speechless, his defensive anger disarmed by the unexpected strategy. He looked at his daughter, seeking her counsel. All eyes turned to Elara. She unclasped her hands and rose from her chair, her movement graceful and deliberate. The storm in her eyes had settled into a calm, assessing resolve. She looked at Damon, seeing the raw, unvarnished hope in his gaze, a vulnerability she had not believed him capable of. 1 month, she said, her voice clear and steady in the tense room. You may stay, and you may try. It was not acceptance. It was a challenge, and for the first time since he had entered the Silverveil territory, King Damon felt a genuine smile touch his lips. The hunt was not over. It had simply begun in earnest. The following days in Silverveil were painted in a different light, one of tentative exploration and unspoken curiosity. King Damon, the formidable ruler accustomed to issuing commands from a throne, found himself navigating the unfamiliar terrain of courtship. His initial attempts were, by any measure, a study in royal awkwardness. He presented Elara with gifts that were meant for a queen, a necklace of moonstones that shimmered with cold fire, a bolt of silk so fine it felt like woven air. They were beautiful, impersonal, and she accepted them with a polite, distant gratitude that felt like a rejection. He requested formal walks through the managed gardens adjacent to the lodge, their conversations a stilted exchange of pleasantries about the weather and the landscape, always under the watchful, suspicious gaze of her father or a designated chaperone. Damon felt a frustration that was entirely new to him. He could command armies and shape the laws of a kingdom, but he could not seem to bridge the quiet distance in this one woman's eyes. He was following a script written by courtly tradition, and it was failing utterly. He realized with a jarring clarity that he was trying to win the idea of Aluna, not the heart of Elara. The turning point came on an afternoon when he found her not in the gardens, but at the edge of the training grounds, watching a group of young pack members spar. There was a keen, focused light in her eyes, an understanding of movement and strategy that was entirely at odds with the demure figure she presented during their walks. He approached her, dismissing the chaperone with a slight nod. You enjoy the dance of combat, he observed, coming to stand beside her. She did not look away from the fighters. I understand it. There is a honesty to it, a clarity of purpose you do not find in word games and politics. Her words struck a chord deep within him. It was the first time she had offered an opinion unsolicited, a fragment of her true self. He decided, in that moment, to abandon the script. The next day, he did not request a walk in the garden. Instead, he found her near the stables and simply said, "Show me what you love about this land." The surprise that flickered in her stormy eyes was genuine. For a long moment, she simply studied him, as if assessing the sincerity of the request. Then, without a word, she turned and led him away from the lodge, away from the manicured paths, and into the deep, untamed embrace of the forest. This was her world. The air grew thick with the scent of pine and rich earth. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in shifting dappled patterns. And as they walked, Elara began to speak, not about trivialities, but about things that mattered. She showed him an ancient oak tree and recounted the pack legend of the first alpha who had sworn his oath beneath its branches. She pointed out a particular herb and explained its healing properties. She named the birds that called from the thickets, imitating their songs with startling accuracy. Damon listened. He did not merely hear her words. He absorbed them. He asked questions not to test her knowledge, but to understand the depth of it. He saw the way her face lit up when she spoke of the history woven into the land, the gentle care in her touch. As she examined a seedling, the formidable king became a student, and the hidden princess became a teacher. Their unchaperoned walks became a daily ritual. The conversations flowed easier, shifting from the land to themselves. He spoke of the immense loneliness of his castle, the weight of a crown that felt more like a burden than a blessing. He confessed his fading belief in the mate bond, the hollow ache that had preceded her arrival. He shared stories of his youth, not all of them glorious, some tinged with regret and the hard lessons of power. In turn, she spoke of her own loneliness within her gilded cage, her yearning to be seen for her strength, and not just protected for her vulnerability. She spoke of her mother, a ghost whose absence shaped both her life and her father's. They were no longer a king and a potential queen. They were Damon and Elara, two solitary souls discovering the unexpected topography of each other's hearts. The magnetic pull of the mate bond, once a screaming imperative, began to transform. It warmed into a quiet, steady hum of connection, a melody woven from shared confidences and mutual respect. It was no longer just a force of fate. It was a choice being made, day by day, walk by walk. He made her laugh, a true, unguarded sound that he coveted more than any praise from his court. She challenged his opinions, and he found himself valuing her perspective, her innate wisdom that came from a different kind of leadership. One evening, as they stood watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of violet and gold over a silent lake, their hands brushed. It was not the explosive contact of their first touch, but something slower, deeper. His fingers gently laced with hers, a question in the gesture. She did not pull away. She turned her hand within his, her fingers curling to hold his in answer. No words were spoken, none were needed. The contract between them was being rewritten not by decree or destiny, but by a slow, undeniable unfolding of the heart. The king was learning to love his queen, and the queen was beginning to believe the king was worthy of her heart, of course. Here is Chapter 6. Chapter 6. A fragile peace had settled over Silverveil, a golden interlude woven from the threads of understanding slowly binding Damon and Elara together. The tension that had once crackled in the air had softened into a tentative, hopeful warmth. For a handful of days, the world consisted only of sun-dappled forests and quiet conversations by moonlit streams. The future, once a source of dread and conflict, began to shimmer with a new and beautiful possibility. This peace was shattered by the arrival of a rider from the north. The man was caked in the dust of hard travel, his face etched with exhaustion and a grim urgency that sent an immediate ripple of alarm through the pack. He was ushered directly into Alpha Corbin's study, where Damon and Elara were discussing the day's ride. The messenger did not bow to his king first. His news was too dire for formalities. "Your Majesty," the man gasped, his chest heaving. "The Shadowmire pack. They have crossed the northern border. They are raiding villages, burning fields. They say you are weakened by your distractions." His eyes flickered almost imperceptibly toward Elara before returning to the king. "They say a king who abandons his throne for a woman does not deserve to hold it. They are gathering strength, testing our defenses. Your presence is required." Immediately, the message landed in the room like a shard of ice. The idyllic bubble of Silverveil vanished, replaced by the cold, hard reality of Damon's duty. The warmth in his eyes vanished, replaced by the flinty resolve of a commander. He saw the strategy instantly. His prolonged absence had been perceived as vulnerability. His interest in the Silverveil Alpha's daughter had been twisted into a tale of neglect. His enemies were not just challenging his border, they were challenging his very right to rule. He turned from the messenger, his mind already calculating routes, marshalling forces, the weight of his crown settling back upon him with a familiar, brutal heaviness. His gaze met Corbin's. The Alpha's expression was unreadable, a mask of stone. Here was the validation of all his fears. Damon's world had indeed brought its danger to their doorstep. Then Damon's eyes found Elara. He saw the color drain from her face, saw the fear for him, for his people, flicker in her gaze. This was the moment he had dreaded. The choice he had known would eventually come. To leave was to honor his kingly duty, but to risk destroying the fragile trust he had built, to appear to confirm every accusation of being a distracted, impulsive ruler. To stay was to protect his heart, but to invite greater chaos to his kingdom, to prove his enemies right and betray the thousands who depended on him. He took a step toward her, his voice low and strained. "Elara, I must go. My people are under attack. My absence has caused this." It was an apology, an explanation, and a heartbreaking farewell all at once. He expected to see the walls go back up in her eyes, the hurt of abandonment. Instead, something remarkable happened. The fear in Elara's eyes did not solidify into rejection. It burned away, forged in an instant into a fierce, unyielding resolve. The strength of her lineage, the innate command of an Alpha's daughter, rose to the surface, not in opposition to him, but in alliance. "You will not go alone," she stated, her voice clear and steady, leaving no room for argument. She moved to stand beside him, facing the winded messenger as if she were already addressing a council of war. "A challenge to the king is a challenge to the queen. A threat to his people is a threat to mine." Damon stared at her, stunned. "Elara, no, it is too dangerous. Your place is here, safe. My place," she said, turning her stormy gaze on him, "is at your side. You are not abandoning your throne for a woman. You are returning to it with your queen. Let them see that. Let them see that your choice has not weakened you, but made you stronger. Let them see us together." She then looked at her father. Alpha Corbin was watching his daughter, and the transformation he saw struck him dumb. This was not his little girl to be hidden away. This was a leader, fierce and courageous, claiming her destiny with a clarity that humbled him. He saw the love she had for this king, not as a passive recipient, but as an active partner. He saw the truth in her words. This was no longer about protecting her from a world of danger. It was about standing with her as she helped defend it. The Alpha's protective fury finally, truly, settled. He gave a single, slow nod, his gaze moving from his daughter to the king. The Silverveil pack stands with the Nightfall Kingdom, he said, his voice a gravelly pledge. Our warriors are yours. My home is your sanctuary. My daughter. He looked at Elara with a pride that brought a sheen to his eyes. My daughter has chosen her path. I will follow her. The moment crystallized, fragile and profound. The threat remained, a dark cloud on the horizon. But within that cloud, a new strength was born. The lovers' journey was over. The march to war had begun, and they would make it together. The journey back to the Nightfall Kingdom was not a retreat but a mobilization. The air crackled with a new energy, a fusion of grim purpose and unshakable unity. Damon, once a solitary king returning to a crisis, now rode at the head of a combined force. His own royal guard, disciplined and fierce, was flanked by the rugged, forest-hardened warriors of Silverveil, their loyalty pledged not just to a king, but to the daughter of their Alpha who rode proudly at his side. Elara was a vision of resolved strength, her back straight, her stormy eyes fixed on the road ahead. She was no longer a hidden treasure or a political complication. She was a symbol of an alliance forged in the fires of choice and challenge. Word of their approach preceded them, carried by scouts and swift riders. The tale that spread was not one of a king weakened by distraction, but of a monarch returning empowered, backed by the strength of a formidable pack and united with a queen whose spirit matched his own. The Shadowmire pack, who had expected to find a kingdom in disarray, found instead a defiant people rallying around their ruler and his unexpected powerful mate. The conflict, when it came, was swift and brutal. It was not a war of vast armies clashing on open fields, but a series of sharp, decisive engagements along the northern border. Damon led the strategy with a cold, brilliant fury, his every command sharpened by the knowledge that he now fought for more than his crown. He fought for their future, and by his side, Elara was his equal. She understood the terrain, the psychology of a predator on the attack, and her insights proved invaluable. She moved among the wounded, not as a distant royal, but as a healer, using her knowledge of herbs, her presence a calming balm that solidified the loyalty of Damon's people. They saw not a delicate consort, but a true Luna, fierce and compassionate in equal measure. The final confrontation took place at a strategic river crossing the Shadowmire forces needed to secure. Under a sky bruised with twilight, the two forces met. Damon fought like a demon, a whirlwind of focused power, but it was a coordinated pincer movement, conceived by Elara and executed by the Silverveil warriors using the forest as their weapon, that broke the enemy's line. The invaders were routed, their ambition drowned in the cold waters of the river. The threat to the kingdom was extinguished in the profound silence that followed the battle. Standing amidst the evidence of their hard-won victory, Damon turned to Elara. Her face was smudged with dirt, her hair coming loose from its braid, but in his eyes, she had never looked more regal. He took her hand, and the bond between them, tested and proven, thrummed with a power that was both gentle and absolute. They had faced the darkness not as individuals, but as one. Weeks later, the great hall of the Nightfall Castle, once a place of echoing solitude, was filled with light and life. Representatives from every corner of the kingdom and from the Silverveil pack stood gathered. The air hummed with a vibrant, hopeful energy. This was not merely a coronation. It was a celebration of a new beginning. Damon stood before his people, no longer a lonely king but a man fulfilled. When it came time to crown his queen, he did not gesture for a bishop or a counselor to perform the rite. Instead, he took the delicate circlet of woven silver and night-blooming jasmine himself. Then, in a move that would be recorded in history and song, he did not place it upon her head. He went to one knee before her, holding the crown up to her. In an offering, his ice-blue eyes holding her stormy gaze. "This is not a crown I bestow upon you," he said, his voice carrying through the rapt silence. "It is a crown you have earned, not through birthright, but through courage, not through fate alone, but through the choice of your heart. I offer you my kingdom, my loyalty, and my love. Will you rule with me, Elara? Will you be my queen? Tears glistened in her eyes, but her voice was strong and clear as she answered, I will. He rose and placed the circlet upon her brow. As he did, the hall erupted in a roar of approval that shook the very stones of the castle. But the cheers faded to a distant murmur as he leaned in and kissed her, a seal upon their vows, a promise of a lifetime. Later, they stood together on the high balcony overlooking the kingdom, the same balcony where he had once stood alone with only the stars for company. Now, her hand was warm in his. The halls behind them were no longer empty. They were filled with the promise of a future built not on solitude, but on partnership. The solitary king and the hidden alpha's daughter had woven their separate threads of loneliness into a tapestry of enduring strength and love. Their story was no longer just about a destined claim, but about a love that had been chosen, fought for, and won. And as the moon rose over their united kingdom, it shone down on two souls who had finally found their home in each other. The end.